God is good cause I say so, cause I am the New Year Mayor. We are going to talk about Mayor Adams, who said that God told him that he would lead New York City, and God personally apparently asked him to publicly proclaim faith. This is taken by the New York Post, written by Bernadette Hogan, June 19, 2023. Please check it on the description of this video. And yes, guys, sadly, this is not the first time that I have seen this. I'm going to talk about many other people who have been telling and saying that God talked to them. But don't you think that is extremely sad that we live in a society where not very rational people can say these type of things? They become huge politicians, and whenever they say these type of things like God talk to me, instead of being received with skepticism, people actually believe them. In this case, we're talking about this guy who revealed her, yeah, that God had visited him several times to help him plan for the role, and most importantly, instructed him to publicly preach about his faith. And as I want to take this outside of the USA, let me tell you about two other examples that have done similar things. On February 2022, John Milton Rodriguez in Colombia said that God told him or prophesied his presidency. Spoiler alert, he fails. And in April 2023, Nicolas Maduro said that the previous Venezuelan president, Chavez, had entered as a bear to talk with him. And luckily, most people laughed at this guy, but that's outside Venezuela. Inside, I think many believed him. And why am I mentioning this? Because these are international examples that we can take into account, and there are a few of those. But if you go to the USA, guys, USA politicians who have said that God talked to them. Ricky Perry, Sarah Palin, Herman Cain, Michael Beckham, Oliver North, Mike Huckabee, Mike Pence, and Cynthia McKinney, Marianne Wilson. And there is a guy here that maybe you are familiar with. He's called Pat Robertson, who is not a politician, but he has claimed that God talked to him, and he has been involved in a lot of political activism, and he has been endorsing political candidates. People, isn't that illegal over there?
It's not illegal if you are doing it as an individual. It would be considered an issue if you are representing a nonprofit, no pun intended, and and actually endorsing specific candidates. But as we all know here in the United States, people, especially when it comes to certain pastors and people who are in leadership, they do whatever the hell they want. And I love that your list, Teo, had like candidates running for different positions and offices who fall on either side of the aisle. You know, some of them represent, you know, the Democratic Party, some represent the Republican Party. So, you know, a lot of people feel that God is talking to them. So we can pack up right now, basically, because obviously they proved God, so we can go. What y'all think? Yeah?
Later.
No?
Yeah,
Okay.
I
Yep.
think it's
Peace.
hard to argue with. It's hard to argue with such loud voices.
Yes, loud voices who are logical in their own heads. But in all seriousness, in the article, um, Adams actually said that about what 30 years ago, he woke up in a cold sweat, and God spoke to his heart and said, "You, sir, are going to be the mayor January 1st, 2022." Now, besides quoting a famous James Brown song, how does Adams' claim impact a group of people like the voters of New York? Or does it have any impact at all? What do you think, Glenn?
Well, to paraphrase a quote, I don't know if faith can do what the mayor believes it can do.
Mm.
I doubt it. But I did see what faith did to skyscrapers
Mm.
in New York City.
Yeah.
And, the mayor saying, don't tell me that when you took prayer out of schools, guns came in, or don't tell me that I had to remove my feelings of God. You saw the front pages of national stories. When I read that quote, I grabbed a barf bag.
Yeah.
Once during a really shitty service with my family had been lured into under false pretenses, the bishop said, don't tell me there is no God. Well, I couldn't resist. Well, maybe I could have. But after loudly saying there is no God, I felt better. Much better if I had a mayor who thought God visited him personally. That day I embarrassed my then theist son, but he did laugh. But the truth is, this is not a laughing matter. And as it was discussed, there's many politicians doing this because it's profitable, because it gets people to vote for them. Now, honestly, I'm not too comfortable piling up on Mayor Adams because I'm concerned he actually believes what he's saying. I'd happily lodge a plethora of insults and biting comments for those who say the same things from a position of dishonesty. I'm just not convinced this is the situation here.
Mm.
But the reality is, it doesn't make his rhetoric any less disgusting or dangerous. Blaming gun violence in schools on a lack of faith is just another way to pass responsibility to someone else. To paraphrase a verse from the book of Esther, the mayor quoted, for such a time as this, the mayor needs to see a medical professional, and New York City needs a recall.
Mm.
Well,
Scott,
what
what
do you think?
about that recall? What are you thinking?
Well, you have to admit that this kind of approach can attract voters, right? If we're talking about, is this going to affect any elections? We're talking about, is this a campaign strategy? And so, God vomiting as a political strategy usually works pretty well in the United States. That's why we see it so often. We heard Teo's immense list there, and that I'm sure that was just scratching the surface. And
Oh
so,
yeah.
so we see this kind of thing come up often. And so it's no surprise that it's effective. However, typically it's going to be effective more. I mean, it's no shock to anyone here that um, uh, the right side of the spectrum tends to be the more religious, and so we would expect that them to be a little bit more vulnerable to that kind of tactic. Is it going to be as effective on the left side? It's tough to say. There's the New York Times recently said about the mayor of New York City. The mayor has never really gotten along with the left. He did not win over progressive voters in the 2020 mayoral primary. Many of them voted for Maya Wiley, a civil rights advocate. But left-leaning Democrats have increasingly raised alarm about the mayor's decisions. His comments casting doubts on the separation of church and state, his response to the migrant crisis and homelessness, and his support for rent increases in charter schools. And so when it comes to the issues, he's not he's losing touch with his voters. And so the question is his embracing of religion this deep, is this going to counteract some of that? And the polls show no, it's not. Current polls show that he has a 37% approval rate in New York and a 43% disapproval rate. Now, if we compare that to a little over a year ago in February 2022, he had 46% approval versus 27% approval. So I'm starting to wonder if his holy mandate, his ultimate celebrity endorsement, I wonder if his luck's running out in that case.
Well, you said something very interesting when you were talking about how the right, or the GOP has a tendency to be a bit more, I guess, vocal about their religion, or be have a tendency to be more theocratic or what have you. But when you really look at Congress in itself, and a lot of the positions that we have in the United States when it comes to elected officials, the majority of them are Christian, and it doesn't even really matter, what party affiliation that they have. I remember one time speaking to a woman who we were trying to help with some campaign stuff, me and some friends of mine. And the first thing that she said to me is, God told her that this candidate was going to win, and the candidate was running, I think that he was running as an independent, but previously he was running as a Democrat. He lost, so I don't know if that was God or gas, who knows. But
Could be both. Could be
could it
both.
be
Yeah,
both?
they're not
Sure.
mutually exclusive.
Sure. But still, that whole belief system per se is still very much so present, regardless of what party affiliation that one has. So even, and also, when I'm thinking about people who happen to be in the seats, when it comes to like their popularity rates because of how they're leaning or how they're handling, certain policies. We already know that, leadership always goes through popularity ebbs and flows. I think that Biden is like in the 30% now, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that he will or will not win if he decides to run again. I think that he is running again, but but we know that that's the thing that goes up and down, and depending on like how that particular poll goes will maybe or maybe not influence how that elected official would actually lead or if they're going to pivot. But regardless of that, and Teo, I'm curious to to think about what you had to say about the impact of these belief systems in an elected official in elected positions. um w- does it even matter per se, even if they may not necessarily be popular or not popular at that particular time, as long as they're saying that give me Jesus because God said, that's good enough? Or do you think that we in the United States, from what you observe, may be running or looking past that?
Oh, I was going to mention right that something related to that because once again I'm obsessed with the harms of religion. I have talked about that before,
Hmm.
and I only see people harming each other and harming others due to religion. Right before I started this, I was checking on Facebook. A guy wrote about certain ex-president who has been found guilty. No, 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 he hasn't been found guilty, but all the evidence are against him. And he was writing how he put the right judges in the right places, so he is not even afraid. He knows he's not going to be judged because his friends who are extremely right wings believers are going to support him. And he made a huge job by talking, making religion so important that they had their own priest in the White House back then.
Mm.
And uh, we have to remember that politicians, sadly, they are in a position of power where they not only can take advantage of their position, but they are judging, they are creating rules, they are voting on rules that are going to affect everybody's lives. So whenever you see a new law that is coming, you can predict what is going to happen with that law and if it's going to affect you or it's going to be positive towards you. And the problem is that when you have politicians who, and I'm going to read another list because here I just at the beginning I read a list of people who said that God talked to them, God tells them what to do. Now I'm going to read a list about people who didn't exactly claim that God spoke to them directly, but they have always talked about how they seek God's guidance and pray for wisdom in order to know what to do and how to vote.
Mhm.
Amongst them, you have George W. Bush, Sarah Palin, Rick Santorum, Louis Gohmert, Randy Forbes, Steve Largent, Stacey Abrams, Ben Carson, Jimmy Carter, all those guys that I'm sure you know about who they are, and I cannot even pronounce their names. They were in charge of the country. They were in charge of laws. They were in charge of deciding what is good for people, what is not good for people, what they need and what they don't. And when their base for what people need is an institution that is constantly hurting people basic rights, you know that things are not going to end up well for people. You know that the decisions that are going to be made are not going to be for the good of people, are going to be made to please an imaginary god that wants people to hate each other and to stun their children if they misbehave and to murder people who have sex with other people according to the mistranslations that you have nowadays. And this is why politicians in power who believe in all these awful things are so dangerous for the whole society. And that's why the USA is is going back to the dark ages again, which I'm very sad to hear every time, guys.
How do you really feel, Teo? I
Yeah, I
can
was just gonna
never
say,
tell.
spill it. Let's hear the
Don't
real
hold it
Teo
in.
come out here.
I just want to make this one correction specifically about Stacey Abrams. She was running for governor of Georgia twice. She did not win. But I have heard her say that she has prayed to God for wisdom and guidance on how to move or whatever. And I guess God didn't hear her. Um,
Oh yeah, in my list it says American politician and voting rights activist. You're right there.
yes, yes. She's definitely a voters rights activist, and she did actually help Georgia specifically flip from their previous election because of her activism. But she never won because I guess God didn't say didn't she didn't wake up in a cold sweat, basically is what I'm saying. So that was
Apparently,
30 years
that's the
ago.
hallmark. That's the
yeah,
signal,
you're
right? If you
right. You
wake up in
got
a
a
cold sweat,
cold sweat,
you're good to go. That's how God
you
talks to you, is through
yes,
cold sweat.
that's in the
With,
book of
with
James
a
Brown.
30-year expiration date.
Yes.
Right, right.
With
Yeah, exactly. Well, he
yes,
got
with
in
a
just under the wire, I think, didn't he?
exactly. Exactly. But I wanted to know because like one of the things that he also said that I thought that was very interesting after he talked about that whole 30 years ago, a few months ago, told me God said X, Y, Z. He got that whole message or whatever that God said talk about God and all this other stuff. He mentioned not too long after that about the whole thing about I think he started to talk about like mass shootings. And I think that one of the things that he said is that when he was talking about the debate for are we going to do something about guns or not or what have you, he said, don't tell me that when you took prayer out of schools guns came in. Don't tell me that I have to remove my feeling of God. And you saw what happened. You saw the front pages and the national story. So, one of my questions, and I kind of would like for you, Glenn, to kind of to think about this, or and just give me your thoughts. When you hear rhetoric specifically from the mayor that says, like, don't tell me about this, don't tell me that, but God is still speaking or what have you. And we have all these different atrocities. How do you think that it actually helps or hinders the discourse about gun violence, which is something that is a very big topic in today's, and it's on the ballot, you know?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So what are
Well,
your thoughts about that? And of
you
course,
know,
like expand on that.
for me, one of the big things is that, as I mentioned earlier, it's just passing the buck. It's pretending a problem that's a very real problem is something else, and we see that already on the right when they go, we need more. What we need is or less doors in the school, or we need this. We don't have a gun problem. We got a door problem. And these type of oversimplistic viewpoints. If you want wisdom, get off your knees. Stop praying, get off your knees and do something. And as long as we start pointing the finger anywhere, whether it's God or the person across the aisle from us or the person who lives next door, it doesn't fix anything. So I think that if anything, what he's doing is actually hindering the problem and not fixing it all. All he's doing is standing in the way. And that really just kind of boils it down for
Yeah.
me.
You know who could fix a door problem? A carpenter. Boom. Boy, I should do this for a living, I think. I should
Okay, I'm going
I've
home.
missed my calling. I've
Pack it
missed my
up.
calling.
Let's go. Let's pack it
But
up.
That's it.
but
That's it.
Adam said that a lack of faith across society has led to upsetting spread of gun violence in schools, homelessness, and domestic abuse. And of
Yeah.
course, laughably, that is the opposite of what's true, right? Studies have shown time and time again that religiosity correlates strongly to higher levels of school violence, mostly in the United States, homelessness, and domestic abuse. I mean, it's not even close.
Yeah.
However, you the question is here though, is it going to help the discourse? Is this going to help the discussion on gun violence? And I think that it might. I think that this kind of thing might, because really what's happening here is he's highlighting this ridiculous position.
Hmm.
Whether he likes it or not, his behavior is highlighting that connection between religious thought and these poor policy decisions. And so I'd be tempted to say, I yield my time to the distinguished His Honor from New York. If the consequences weren't so dire, of course. I don't know. Tail, what are your thoughts, Tail?
Well, I was thinking about the other part of this that he was able to prophesize that he was going to be mayor. Ironically, God can only prophesize things that already happened. So there is a reason why he didn't mention this like 30 years before when he actually woke up like that. And this is like a constant because whenever you see prophecies in the world, they tend to fail, as the Jehovah Witnesses, who have had like three more of them at least, or several other guys that I could mention, but I have made two lists already. Why one more? And yeah, guys, for some reason I don't believe politicians. I tend to believe that all of them are dishonest, and I still haven't met a single one that proved me wrong. So it's sad that people believe in these guys. It's quite sad. That,
Hmm.
that that's it. I don't know, Glenn, what you think about it.
Well, I have to say that, Scott, I hope you're right. I really hope that this does bring a focus to the absolute sheer absurdity of what they're saying. I will admit I'm a little pessimistic. Recently, I watched a live stream of my mother in law's church while my daughter was there. And they're ranting and raving literally against wokeism and leftism and LGBTQ, and even talked about some law in Michigan to ban woke. And I'm like, that's a lie. So these people, the reality doesn't care. They don't care about reality. And that, I hope you're right, Scott. But I fear that when you're playing to a certain audience, it's like you're preaching to the choir, and that's what I'm afraid is going to happen.
Well, I think that the choir has sung and God has spoken to all of us on this particular day. And I do hope that you're right too, Scott. But I'm a little pessimistic myself. A lot of times when you have elected officials get too Jesus-y on the on what they are saying, and then mixing it into how they lead, it's an issue. Ask
Yeah.
Constantine. But but if you all want a more, not just of Constantine, saying things and sending his mother out to find the Holy Grail or at least the cross of Jesus, won't you click here?